Hello, everyone. My name's Steve Teskey. This is Justice Redesign. Welcome back. This is going to be episode 3 of our continuing series. It's called A Conversation with Pastor Edward Palmer on Implicit Bias, DEI Backlash, and the struggle for true equity. Now, in our last episode, we tackled how the language of justice is being suppressed, how words like equity, race, and inclusion are being stripped from policies and programs under the guise of neutrality. But today, we take a more personal turn because when equity becomes, let's say, a dirty word, the people who have built their lives around equity become targets of silence. In this episode titled Personal Impact from Invitations to Silence, I'm going to be asking Pastor Palmer to share what that silence feels like after decades of passionate work, national recognition, and meaningful change. I'm going to be asking, what's it like to pour yourself into justice reform, only to be quietly excluded when political tides shift? And does this silence come from fear, or is it from fatigue, from political pressure, or from something deeper and more dangerous, or a combination of these things? And is Pastor Palmer's story is unique, or is it part of a broader pattern across the country? If you've ever wondered what the cost of progress feels like behind closed doors, this is the episode for you. So, with all that said, let's begin. I want to talk a little bit more about the personal impact from invitations to the silence as you've described. What has it felt like, Pastor, after all your years of passionate work and progress to be met now with institutional silence?
I'm gonna say this to a friend. Um, uh, Steve Teskey has been my friend for probably close to 2 decades, and his wife Cheryl. Um, and this man has been with me through it all. He calls me, I call him. We share our frustrations. Every opportunity he gets to bring me along to have these difficult conversations, he's trying. I try to reach out to him to collaborate. Um, so it's good to see my friend still my friend, even in these difficult times. But to flip that, it feels like betrayal. If you were not calling me, if you were not connecting with me, if you're not collaborating with me, it would feel like betrayal. It would feel like I'm on my own. We're on our own. All of those partners we had within systems to work on this issue to try to make things better for Black and Brown, LGBTQ girls in the system have abandoned us. And I thought we were friends. I thought we were colleagues in this work. So yes, the silence feels like betrayal. The silence feels like I'm alone with just a few others to kind of carry this load up the hill. And so yeah, it's difficult because you know you go back for 3 4 years. I mean, there was so many folks you connected with at conferences and you collaborated with on these issues, and you and I were able to go to places and bring stakeholders together and have some very meaningful conversations about systemic reform. And now some of those folks are won't even return our calls, and so it feels like betrayal. The door's been open, and it feels like the work on the part of some was tokenism. It was we did it because we had to do it. We did it because somebody did something egregious and they appeared on a YouTube video, and so we had to do trainings, and so we did it. But now that we're in an environment where we're being encouraged not to do it, then it's so easy to give up the fight and not do it. So it feels like betrayal.
I can so much relate, Pastor, because even in all that work, we come across while a majority of them, given the present political circumstances involving DEI and no reference to it, um, we still know that there are leaders out there that felt good about what they were doing with your help. Okay, but then what's interesting is that when all of a sudden you have this dramatic shift in policy that says, "Oh no, no, you can't bring this up. You can't do this anymore." That then there's those few, okay, who all of a sudden come out and say, "I never liked it in the first place," and but you may have known that maybe in conversations with them or not, and um, and I interviewed Liz Ryan, okay, and for my listeners, she was the administrator of the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention under President Biden's term. And when I interviewed her, Pastor, I was asking her the question about, well, with this anti DEI, how is Trump going to deal with the four core protections, particularly race, equity, and diversity, the red, uh, you know, uh, in the Juvenile Justice Delinquency Prevention Act passed by Congress, which is the law which is designed to reduce racial disparities in our juvenile justice systems. How is he now going to attack the JJDP and get that removed? And her response was that she didn't think so because Senator Grassley has been such a big, he's the chair of the Senate Judiciary Committee, a very powerful person,
Mhm.
and is such a big proponent of, and it's been such a bipartisan thing. Though I'm not so sure that means anything anymore, but hopefully it does. But she did say this. She did say this. She said, we've been doing this work since the beginning days of the JJDPA, since the early 70s. And there has been a lot of progress made, okay, at local levels. And what we can hope for now, that number one, this is just a passing moment, okay? And number two, that by the time this moment passes, that any damage has been done, okay, has been light, okay, because of the many years of institutionalizing the whole concept of how important it is to identify any racial disparities and to positively address it, like your implicit bias training is one
Mhm.
among them. Okay. Um, I wanted to point, any thoughts you have on that?
Yeah, I think the danger is that when this moment passes, um, their lives would have already been ruined. And you and I know that in any given jurisdiction, especially when we start talking about our cities, we're talking about hundreds, if not thousands, of kids who could have and should have been diverted from the system and given opportunity to self-correct in a community-based program versus going deeper into the juvenile justice system and increasing the possibility of future crimes and criminal activity and incarceration as an adult. And so I agree with her that this too shall pass, but what will be the damage? And if one life is lost and damaged, that's one too many. In this case, we know that thousands of kids, tens of thousands of kids come into the juvenile justice system daily in this country. And and if we have a system that is disproportionately affecting a particular population in a negative way than others, and that's thousands a day, um, what would the damage be? I mean, when you look at the list of kids who are serving life without parole in this country, it's almost all black. And what so as this era passes us and this behavior continues to escalate, when we're done and we start to try to correct some of this, what would be the damage? And that's something we can't reverse, the trauma of being incarcerated in the facility because you did something in your adolescent years that was consistent with the brain development science that but yet there your life is ruined. And so yeah, I agree with her analysis that 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 we're going to get through this and this moment is going to pass. I just because I have four black grandchildren, boys rather, four black grandboys. I'm afraid for them, and and tell me after their lives have been ruined, and we get through this era, oh, things are better now. Well, it's too late for my grandson, right? And so, yeah, I think the field needs to. Those of us who are serious and passionate about this, we need to keep pushing and stay on the field. If we fall down, get back up, and continue to fight in this. Let's not wait until it passes. Let's continue to fight because lives are being lost every day in this system.
Well, that's a very good point because, going back to the school justice partnership, what motivated me to look at the school system and not just simply the numbers and identifying that one third of all juvenile complaints, delinquency complaints coming into my court uh, was coming from the school system, but that 92% of those complaints were misdemeanor offenses, mostly school fights, disorderly conduct, kids wrapping up a ball of paper, throwing it across the classroom, and we're getting handcuffed for that. Okay, and then what was happening is that we then broke down the numbers. We were able to get deeper and break it down by race and find out that we had kids who were committing similar acts like that who were white, not getting referred to the juvenile court, but the black kids were. And
Hmm.
so what motivated me to do that was because we talked about race, was because we
Hmm.
talked about equity, was because we talked about inclusion. Okay. All right.
Hmm.
And it's because we talked about those things that not only did we as a collective, as a collaborative, when I brought everyone together and we looked at the data, we began to embrace, okay, we really do have a problem here. How are we going to deal
Hmm.
with it? Okay.
Right.
And we ended up with the outcomes that we still have today, where not only did it increase graduation rates by up to 30%, okay, because we stopped kicking kids out of school and arresting them on campus and doing all the things that cause kids to drop out of school, all right, who now graduate high school. And well, the more kids you graduate, the fewer crimes kids are going to be committing, and kids become adults. That means later on, fewer adults committing crimes in your community, right? So we all realize, and that's why North Carolina has mandated, made it state law, and there are a couple other states who've done the same thing, and now this is replicated. My point is this: white kids benefited too, like you said earlier,
Hmm.
because there were still white kids who got unnecessarily beaten up, probably way they were looked at, poor, social class, whatever the case may be. But there were still white kids that benefited too, and now have graduated high school and otherwise would not have done it. My point is based upon what you're saying from my own experience, okay? I wouldn't have done the school justice partnership if I had not already been influenced by the Annie Casey Foundation and their juvenile detention long term initiative, for which I um, lobbied to become a member and participant, and they allowed Clayton County in, and that was their major focus. Had that not been their major focus, it wouldn't have been my major focus necessarily. It may have
Right.
become that later, but early on in my career, it became that. And it was because of that that there became so many positive outcomes, because we did talk about race, we did talk about equity, we did talk about inclusion. We would not have gotten there if we were forbidden from having that conversation, is what I'm
Yeah.
saying. Your thoughts on that?
No, I agree. I think you took this natural approach that systems have to white kids, and that is it's a child, he made a bad mistake, and we use common sense. This pisses me off, but this has nothing to do with public safety. You say that all the time. We should save those cells for kids who scare us and not for kids who piss us off, right? And so when we think about your approach in the school justice partnership was just about that. It was about common sense. It was about looking at the fact that these are misdemeanors, these are annoyances, but they're not criminal. They're not things that scare us. We don't take this public safety lens and put every kid that violates a policy or a law and throw them into this public safety bowl and say send them to jail. We when it comes to white kids, we know how to filter through that and realize that this is an annoyance, but this doesn't deserve the criminal response of locking this kid away. And you said to the system, we're not doing the same thing to black kids. A piece of paper thrown across the room is a piece of paper thrown across the room, but it looks differently when a white kid throws it, and it looks more violent and more scary when a black kid throws it. But at the end of the day, it's just a piece of paper, right? And so you took this common sense approach and invoked race into the conversation, and it became easy to realize that, yes, you're right. These things annoy us, but they're not public safety threats. And we don't need to start sending kids to court and putting judges in the position to mandate something that the kid is incapable of doing, and then violating the kid because he disobeyed the judge's order and sending them to prison or sending them to the detention center, locking them in a cage because the original offense was he threw a piece of paper across the classroom, but he ended up in court. And now you elevate it to a don't do it again or go to detention. And once you do that, now we got a kid locked away in detention next to a kid who raped somebody or killed somebody. And we want to teach that kid a lesson. But the real teacher is the kid that created a more egregious crime, who's now teaching that kid how to escalate his criminal activity. So you took a common sense approach to how we deal with kids. And I think you took this approach long before you were really exposed in depth to the adolescent brain development science. And so the adolescent brain development science and the movement around that really, to me, solidified your approach to saying, listen, these are just kids being kids. And if we think back to our childhood, we realize we did some of those same annoying things, but it didn't deserve a criminal response. I wouldn't imagine growing up on the south side of Chicago with gangs everywhere, going to jail or going to court because I had a fight with a guy in school over my girlfriend. We went to the principal's office, and he made us wash blackboards or something at the end of the day, and we became the best of friends, afterwards. And so, yeah, thank you for that common sense approach.
I appreciate that, Pastor. And thank you for sharing that. And, you know, uh, you mentioned about us being teenagers, and the whole adolescent brain research for my listeners who may not have read into that or well versed in it, but, the frontal lobe up here doesn't develop till age 25, particularly with males, and then females, as the studies show, around 23. But that's the part of the brain that translates emotion into logic, which means that's why teenagers are prone to risk-taking behaviors and doing what seemingly seem to be stupid things. Although kids are not stupid. Kids, I mean, our brain is at its highest level of intellectual functioning in our teen years. So I don't want people to think that just because I use the word stupid, that kids in general are stupid. They're not. I mean, you and I are already on the downhill, okay,
Right,
when it
right.
comes to our intellectual capacity. But be that as it may, when I was 13, I did something so stupid it caused the police and the fire department to come out. I won't get into that. That's a story for another day, okay? But yet I became a judge. I became a judge because there was a principal. Well, first of all, we didn't have zero tolerance policies in the day. And number
Yeah.
two, I had a principal who had mercy, understood forgiveness, and, treated me. But God forbid, I would hate to think what would happen if I were black.
Right.
I, I anyway. But so let me ask you this. You've already answered this question, I think, but I want to play it safe. It's kind of like when I'm asking a witness a question, and at the end, particularly in my child welfare cases, and when they're review hearings, I'll ask the social worker, okay, is there anything you want his or her honor to know that hasn't come out from the questions I've asked you? It's kind of like one of those things. But
Mhm.
this is a little bit more specific. Do you think that this silence, okay, that you're getting from where before you were requested to come and travel and visit, do you think it's fear, it's fatigue, it's politics, a combination, or something deeper?
I think it's all of the above. I definitely think it's fear, especially when it comes to state agencies. There's a lot of resources coming from the federal government, and so there's fear of losing those resources. And in some cases, people are afraid of losing their jobs and not being able to take care of their families. I think it is political. I think we've gotten so polarized by right or left, Republican or Democrat, that we've lost our humanity. We've lost the ability to say that's wrong. And it doesn't matter that it's coming from one side or the other. We should not treat kids this way. And so I think it's a little bit of politics, a little bit of fear, but then I think it's something much deeper than that because just Sesky, the systems that operate this country were developed. The foundation of those systems were developed by white men, white land-owning men, and they built a system for themselves. And the policies that emerged from that foundational system were constructed to keep certain groups at bay. And so, and then we came along with anti-discrimination policies and laws. We came along with civil rights laws, and understand something about people need to understand something about civil rights laws. They did not just elevate African Americans. They elevated women's issues. They elevated LGBTQ issues. They elevated Asian issues and immigrant populations and their issues. And so there's always been though this tendency to go back to who is supposed to be at the top, and it's always been that population of white males. And so we got to deal with the reality that at the core of this country is this ideology of white supremacy, and to me, that's the deeper issue that is at play here. We have white men using words like meritocracy to justify firing or pushing out very accomplished black leaders in government positions and putting in people who haven't even scratched the surface of being qualified, and yet say they're against giving people jobs they don't deserve or they're not qualified for. So at the end of the day, what makes this person more qualified than his predecessor, who was highly credentialed for the job, is because he's a white male, and so don't question his qualifications in comparison to the other one because the other guy was black. So no matter what school he graduated from, being a West Point graduate, and all these things, they pale in comparison to the fact that this is a white man. And so we've got to be willing to have that conversation because that's the core and that's the deeper issue is to look at the fact that when our country was founded, and we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal, the author himself owned people who look like me. And he continued to own them for decades following writing those great words. So he wasn't talking about the slave he owned. And we have to be willing to acknowledge he wasn't talking about the woman in his life that he lay in bed with. He didn't want her to be his equal either. And so at the core of it, there is something much deeper in the psyche of this country called white supremacy that we have to deal with.
And that's the importance of understanding histrionics, and we cannot dismiss it because it's those histrionics and knowing it that has created the fabric,
Mhm.
not just simply the country systemically, but even the individuals that live in this country. Okay.
Mhm.
Well, that concludes episode 3 of a conversation with Pastor Edward Palmer on implicit bias, DEI, backlash, and the struggle for, well, true equity. Now, in this episode, we took a deeper look at the human cost of the anti DEI movement, not in statistics or sound bites, but in the lived experience of Pastor Palmer himself. We heard how the doors that once opened widely for his message of equity are now closing quietly. We explored the emotional toll of being silenced, not for what you said, but for what you stand for. But the story isn't over, folks. No, it's not. In our final episode, we'll go beyond the personal and examine the political gamesmanship behind racial division. We'll ask, is there truth to the idea explored in books like Hillbilly Elegy, written by Vice President J.D. Vance, that some poor white communities oppose racial equity because it threatens a sense of status? And how do we reframe equity as something that lifts everyone, not just communities of color? We'll also close our series with a powerful final segment, and that is reclaiming the language, moving forward. How do we do that? And we're going to be asking Pastor Palmer, if we had the chance to speak directly to this administration, what would he say about their anti-DEI policies? You know, folks, for those of you listening, educators, advocates, everyday citizens who are discouraged by this climate, what guidance would he give to keep the fire of justice burning? Hey, you won't want to miss this final, heartfelt, and visionary conversation. Join us for episode 4 of Justice Redesigned. Thank you for watching and listening. In the meantime, please be safe. Take care.